Hey guys, it's Dasherzak back with another review, this time of a couple things from Overpower. We've got a pad from their WGR series, as well as some Eagle Speed Skates here to try out, see how these compare to the X-Ray Pad Jades. This is a company that I have had recommended to me before, and I'm very glad that they reached out. But what is this pad with the crazy art all about? And should these skates replace X-Ray Pad Jades on your desk? Let's find out. So here we have the skeleton pad from the Overpower WGR series. And then we've got these Eagle skates as well. These are the normal size dots, and then we have these variable size dots. These are pretty cool. And I'll talk about why that is here in a little bit. But just to give you an overview of the options we have here. Overpower has a few different offerings here. They have two different series of mouse pads, the Beast and WGR. I've heard really good things about these Beast pads. I know Dad by Guru, for example, really enjoys the Summer Camp mouse pad. I've heard great things about its performance, and I'll probably try that out here in the future. Today we're talking about the WGR series. It has 4 different art options here, all the same surface. I debated, ended up going with the skeleton one. But basically it only comes in one size at 490 by 420. And 4mm thick. It's a very unique surface, a nylon spandex combination. I'm a huge fan of spandex speed pads, and this feels somewhat similar but a little bit different with the added nylon. Polyurethane foam base, soft hardness, touted as both speed and control, and we'll talk about that here in a bit as well. Coming to the skates, all these skates here are referred to as Eagle skates. There is a control and a speed version. The ones that I was sent out was the speed version, and you get 40 skates here for $9. I believe it comes out to just about 12 bucks here with shipping, and that's a little bit cheaper than if you're going for X-Ray Pad Jades, which I'll be comparing them to in this video. Through like a reseller like LGG, for now at least, with the Pulsar acquisition. We'll see where that goes. But these Eagle Speeds here, they're PTFE. And beside the speed skates, we also have these control skates here. They are black and they're made of UPE, which is meant to be quieter and more resistant to wear. So these are a little bit more targeted to glass pads. I would love to try these out as well. I'm assuming they're competition for something like the Obsidian Airs or the Obsidian Air Pros. And with the amount of glass pads I've been using lately, I'll be sure to test these out as well and report back. We're going to go in depth here with the skates first. This is my K7 Ultra. This has standard stock pads, but this is my Uden S9 Ultra, the red one that I reviewed before. And you see here, I have 4 Eagle dots on this. 4 dots in those positions provide plenty of stability. I tested that on both glass and on cloth. As you can see here, the skates are very thick, well-rounded. Like I said, 0.8 millimeters. They're 6.6 millimeters in diameter, which is 0.1 millimeter larger than an X-Ray Pad Jade. Not a big deal there. But beside that, from looks and thickness, very high quality feeling, just like your standard dot skate. And then your second option here that I got sent out, different sizes. I tested a different set of these, but this is a very brand new one. I don't have any applied to my mice right now. The reason I think this is really cool, got more stability. You can use these larger dots here, which have a very nice rounding on the edge on a mouse like this because you have the real estate in these spots. Or like a ULX here, because you can put any skate you want on the bottom. It's fully flat. For example, I think these are Cyrox V6 Magic Ice, but I put them on there because they work and they're fine. I think an underrated thing here is these little smaller dots, and I think I've seen ESP Tire do the same thing. No guarantees, but for example, this is the Ala SC900, and you see this is a very skinny skate down here. This one might be too skinny, but like from my estimation, it does look like these would fit in there, but basically these smaller dot skates, perfect to replace the really crappy stock skates on a mouse like this. And by crappy, I mean just not performing the way I want. These are like, for example, well-rounded. They're like thick enough. They're fine. But there's a lot of mice where because this is so narrow, you can't get the dots in there. Having this multi-size dot option, a great way to hack that. You get a great skate performance on a more budget mouse. And for reference here, this second row is the average dot size, and the smaller ones, slightly larger, and then the very, very large dots. But the real question is, how do these perform for me? So just to give a quick glide comparison here, for example, here's the stock skates on the K7 and the pads. Then we have the Eagle Speed dots. Look at that glide. Right across the pad. About the same force used there. I know, very scientific. We'll get some more numbers here in a little bit. The thing I noticed about these skates, very low static friction, which I love. Really helps with micro adjustments and changing direction if you have good aim. But also, once the glide gets going, it really likes to continue. If you get some momentum going, you maintain that speed, but it's very constant, and I found that very helpful in scenarios like Smoothbot, for example. Shocker, I'm talking about Smoothbot. But yeah, before testing, basically, my impression of these was they're very quick. They're very good. Maybe they're the same as Jades, maybe a bit faster. Those are my estimations. And I found that I was not actually too far off base. So, just a quick look at my testing numbers, and yes, I didn't do a ton of measurements here. The testing value you see here are the static friction in newtons for the initial movement of the mouse, and then dynamic is not really a point of reference you can really look at, but this is the slow motion time in seconds it took to get from the top of my pad to the bottom of the pad after releasing the mouse. Also, forgive the naming here. Lolita is what I, for some reason, was thinking the pad was called. There is an Alita art version of the WGR pads, but this Lolita, whenever you see it here, this means WGR. This means the skeleton. So I did the skeleton WGR versus the Heian to compare the pad, and then I did Eagle versus Jade to compare the skates. And as you saw there, shockingly, these Eagle skates with my measurements came in 29% faster in static friction versus Jades. And basically the state that I tested these skates in was lightly used. So basically like peak skate. They're not fresh out of the box, but they've been used a little bit. They're worn in, whatever that effect will have. I didn't notice much of an effect here on these Eagle Speed skates, for example. They seemed pretty similar when they came out of the box. Roughly 30% faster in static friction. And then they were pretty similar to Jades. These being the original Jades, not Jade Airs, in dynamic friction. They came through at 1.32% faster in overall dynamic glide. So virtually identical to Jades as far as the glide goes, which I'm really impressed with because Jade's my all-time favorite speed skate. skate as far as like, I guess you would call designer skates go. I've got this set here because I bought their like mystery box once and got all their skates, and I tested them both on this Uden S9 Ultra. So I guess props to me for kind of feeling these out as Jades. They are speeds. They are pretty much performing as Jades. The fact that there's a lower static friction is pretty interesting. Theoretically, it's something I like because I've been really enjoying glass pads lately. So the lower static friction on these made it much easier to transition back to using some cloth for this testing, and I did appreciate that. So again, overall, not much more I can say about the skates except for that they seem very high quality to me. They're pretty well priced. The performance is pretty much on par with X-Ray Pad Jades, which are like the de facto speed skates. I love these. I'm glad that Oro Power sent them out. Side note, all my thoughts and opinions in this video are my own, not at all influenced by the fact this was sent out to me. Great performance here. I didn't notice any excess wear or anything like that, any problems. Nothing really stuck out to me as an issue. And one more thing I will say is that dot skates typically allow you to feel more of texture in a pad. So like I did test this on the Heian somewhat. I really like the feeling it gave me. Basically, it would let me feel that texture, which I think on the Heian, even though it's a faster pad, gives me more of a sense of control. It's like a mental thing. I feel the texture, so I feel more in control. It was still a very smooth glide. It wasn't overly rough like you would get some thin stock crappy skates like I showed you on the LS SC900. So overall, these skates performed pretty much as I would like. So I definitely give these my full endorsement as far as speed skates go, with the cool caveat that you can get these different sizes should you want them. Moving on to the WGR series pad, again, the skeleton here. The surface is very unique. As you saw with the Eagle skates, the glide on this pretty quick, especially with these speed skates. Not a complete lack of dynamic friction, enough to give you a sense of control, but a pretty quick pad overall. And I think that's owed partially to the actual surface here. It's very, very soft. It's one of the smoother pads I've had in like a unique way. It's not like the Energon, for example, where it's the smoothest surface I've ever felt. Like if you go back and forth here, you can feel like a texture, like a sort of like soft cloth feeling rubbing up and down in your fingers. I detect like a stark contrast as far as XY. Y is greater. You can really feel that when you're dragging this larger skates down here. It was a little bit less apparent on these dot skates here, but still present. Probably an aspect of dot skates that's not talked about enough is I think it minimizes XY dynamic friction difference, but that could just be my thought. Who knows if that's accurate? Give me your thoughts below in the comments. Shout out to my Apple Watch tan line. Anyway, you might not be able to hear it, but it has like that sort of similar sound you would get to like a nylon pad, like almost like zipping sound you would get if you ever hand over like a sweatsuit, for example. But I will say when I go back and forth like this, I get like this sort of little like tingly feeling on my fingers, and that's due to the slight bit of texture, and I think the nylon combination with the spandex that really gives us a unique feel. Beyond those surface properties, again, we're 4mm thick here, and as you can see, this base has like a hex design. It's actually very smooth. As far as staying in place, it does a pretty good job, but I will say if I applied like pressure where I lean my arm on it quite a bit, I could get like a little bit, like you can see here, it does move, like it's not the stickiest base, it will move back and forth a little bit. And I would say that's one of the two suggestions I would have for this pad. A little bit stickier of a base, potentially also give us a mid option to really get that speed going. The sort of elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned, the art. This art style is just not for me at all. In fact, the art style on these four in the WGR series was really not for me at all anyway, but this is one that I chose. But I tend to just stray away from like girls on pads. It's just not my thing. I think this is going with sort of like an American comic theme, if that's your thing, but again, not for me. It seems like just sort of random text phrases that don't really kind of go together. I'll take this over an anime girl pad any day of the week for what that's worth, but I would also really love if they would just give us like basic color options, preferably black, but also some other options like anything, blue, green, purple, pink, anything like that. Love those options on a mouse pad. I'll be honest, often if a pad's only in black, I just won't get it unless it's a super unique surface. Again, this is unique art, so there's that going for it, but just not my favorite. And then one more thing about the base, again, I said earlier it was qualified as soft, and there's a fair bit of plushiness to it. You can see here my fingers sink pretty decently into both the bottom and the top as I squeeze. I would classify this as probably close to an Artisan Soft as a good point of reference most people have tried. Maybe somewhere like my Saturn Pro X Soft I had that wasn't quite as pillow plush as the Artisan X Soft. Maybe Artisan Soft, maybe like Artisan Soft Plus, leaning towards an X Soft. And on that note, if you press down here, there's like a slight time before it rebounds, which does allow you to have a stronger sense of control. But I do prefer my rebound on pads to be a little bit quicker than that. I've been working a lot recently on my tension and how much I press down on the mouse. So even with dots, I didn't have a big issue with that, but you can tell if you apply a little bit of pressure, you're slowing down quite a bit. So definitely in the soft range of bases and not the springiest. And lastly, let's talk about some of the numbers that you saw earlier as far as the friction on this. The direct comparison I did was to a Heian, and the Heian that I have is I would consider very lightly used, just like this over my few weeks of testing it. And what it came down to is the Lolita had 12% less static friction in my estimation, which again, pretty impressive. The combination of that low static friction on the skates and the pad really felt good to me as far as micro adjustments and change of direction. There was no real tug on my skates ever, which was something I really found that I enjoy in both aim training and in game. And then the Heian, like we think of that as a pretty quick pad, right? For me, it's like toward the top end of speed without getting into like the actual speed pads. Hybrid speed, lean towards speed, definitely not control. And interestingly enough, the dynamic test for me on this pad came in with a 3.79% faster dynamic friction than the Heian. So this pad is pretty darn quick, and I didn't really feel like I experienced any slowdown after testing it for a little bit here, which brings me to my overall impression of the pad, and that is the performance of this thing is pretty spot on for what I like. The generally low dynamic friction without being too crazy fast is exactly the kind of pad I prefer to use in game when I'm not on glass. Heian is one of my mains in Fortnite when I'm really trying to bear down and playing competitive, for example. And then the lower static friction, also something I really enjoy. I love smooth pads with just a little bit of feedback texture, so this qualifies as that. Reminds me in that way sort of the Infinite Speed V2, not quite as textured as one of my copies of the Infinite Speed V2, and about the same as the other other one that I had. Interesting that I had some variants there, but regardless, if you like these sort of speed aspects to a pad, and you don't mind the fact that it's a softer base, which is their only option, and the 490 by 420 size, I can definitely give this pad a recommendation performance-wise. Again, art, not my favorite, and I am definitely like an X-Style Square 500 by 500 guy, which is not an option here. One more suggestion I might have in the future, but I do know that it complicates shipping costs, so I do understand this size. Like I said, I'm maining glass recently, and coming back to this with these skates and this pad did not feel slow to me at all. The last time I came back from glass, I was like, what is this muddy disaster? I think I was still on like an Aqua Control Pro Mid Neon, which is not a slow pad by any means. Even though they're a less known company, I'm overall pretty impressed with what Overpower is putting out. Between their Eagle skates, this pad here, I was very pleased with my experience. No major qualms, strong recommendation from me. And that about wraps up my thoughts as I just tossed random stuff on the pad here so you can see it again on the Eagle Speed skates and the WGR pad series from Overpower. Be sure to follow me on X at DasherZach. Join up on my Discord server, chatting about peripherals all day long. Check out the Mousecast podcast, and with that, we'll see you.